Hello and welcome to our webinar, How to be Part of the Biotech Boom in 2021. I'm Tim Davis, I'm a regional head in primary markets at the London Stock Exchange, and I'm also the lead on UK healthcare. Today's webinar is based around the BioIndustry Association's recent report, Opportunity on Your Doorstep, which is available as a free download from their website. The report is designed to help both novice and experienced investors explore and understand the wide range of investment opportunities presented by one of the world's most dynamic and fast-growing industries. Yet in the UK, it's COVID that has served to cement our position as a world leader in the field, and never before has the industry been so much in the public eye. And with that, new investment opportunities continue to emerge. In public company terms, we currently have 110 listed sector companies across our markets with a cumulative value of over £230 billion, covering everything from pure therapeutics through to medical devices, through to digital health plays and platform and services businesses. Indeed, on our AIM market in the last 4 months, we've had as many new companies join the market and raise growth capital at the same time. To put that into further context, this year we've seen over £2.6 billion raised on our markets by sector companies in IPOs and follow-on rounds. And the sector is the third best performer after tech and basic materials, and this year it's even outperformed the FTSE 100. The webinar will last 45 minutes, and we welcome any questions via Slido, which you can access via the webinar landing page or log on via www.slido and enter the code in caps Biotech 2021. We based the webinar around a series of questions to the panel, allowing 4 minutes per answer, so apologies in advance if I have to call time on anybody. And then we'll close the session by asking each panelist to share their one investment-related thought for the future. So to get things started, I'd now like to ask our panelists briefly to introduce themselves. Andy. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you. That's the first mistake. Hi, I'm Andy Richards. I'm a life science company founder, scaler, director, and investor. I've had a significant role over the last few decades in some 25 to 30 UK biotechs. As an investor, I invest as an angel and in my own right, and I'm advisor to funds and invest in both privates and publics. And I'm also deeply committed to the ecosystem in a whole set of ways, one of the most important through Cancer Research UK.
Great. Ruth.
Hello, I'm Ruth McKernan. I'm a neuroscientist by training. I spent 27 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and I've headed research and development sites in the UK.
Oh dear.
Oh. Ruth is frozen. Barbara, would you like to carry on?
Sure. Hi, my name is Barbara Domayne-Hayman. I'm trained as a chemist, but went straight into industry after my PhD, went into marketing for over 10 years in ICI, which became AstraZeneca. And then after an early midlife crisis, I went to business school and decided to go into the biotech world, where I've been for about 20 years. I currently have a portfolio of roles. So I'm Chief Business Officer at Autophony Therapeutics, which is developing drugs for serious CNS disorders like schizophrenia. I'm entrepreneur in residence at the Francis Crick Institute, where I help to run an accelerator program called KQ Labs for data-driven health startups from all over the UK. And I'm also involved in a couple of early stage investment committees. So the Cambridge University Seed Investment Committee, and I chair the LifeArc Seed Investment Committee.
Great. And last but not least, Jeremy, please.
Hello. My name is Jeremy Curnock-Cook. I manage biotech-focused investment funds and have done so since the mid-80s in the UK and internationally. Before that, I was a biotech entrepreneur, in fact, a microbiologist who founded a business and worried about what I'd done for the following decade before selling the business to Royal Dutch Shell. So my role today is primarily to facilitate the conversion of biotechnology to practical applications in medicine and in healthcare.
Great, thanks very much all. And now if we can turn to the questions. Ruth, may we start with you? What is biotech and what are the different types of biotech companies our audience might come across?
Oh, well, you know, put in its most simple form, biotech is harnessing biological processes for commercial purpose. But that all sounds a bit dry, really, and it covers a richness of different businesses and different approaches. I think the audience is probably most familiar with the life science and medical side of it. So anything from creating new medicines that are small molecules or antibodies, people would be familiar with, but more recently, cells as therapeutics, particularly in cancer, would be of interest. And obviously, everybody is now an expert on COVID, so any RNA-based products or modified viral products would come into view. And then underpinning all of those new medicines and therapeutics is a whole variety of technologies that are absolutely critical to help the medicines companies do their jobs. So things like the technologies and services that sequence DNA, that provide reagents, the services, the AI analysis, I would regard all of those as biotech companies too. And then we can think about even diagnostics, new approaches to understand who should get which medicine. So there's a big effort on precision medicine, biotech companies that are trying to match diagnostics or devices with therapeutics, and even digital approaches as therapeutics themselves. So there are therapeutics that encourage you to give up smoking. It's not a tablet, it's a digital application. This is the next wave of biotech companies. And then the third area is a whole new set of companies coming into view that are really much more about understanding the environment and have environmental purposes. So considering cleaner energy, technologies that improve food production, technologies that create biodegradable materials, everything from engineered spider silk to making degradable cling film, for example. Wow. We have a huge plethora of biotech companies founded in the UK, growing in the UK. And for the BIA, the organisation I chair, 600 members covering that huge breadth of opportunity.
Okay, thanks for that. Andy, can I pick up with you one point on that, which is, I think I'm right in saying that drug development is the largest component of biotech still? Andy?
Yes, yes, it is.
And how does that fit into the wider healthcare sector?
Well, and particularly the pharmaceutical industry. Of course, most investors will be aware of the pharmaceutical industry, huge, global, sophisticated, important sector, which the UK again has some leaders. But what's interesting about that sector is that it has an insatiable desire for new products, and that is driven by areas of medical need where there isn't anything, or what's there doesn't work very well. And as we age, those areas keep growing and getting more important. But over the last sort of couple of decades, there's been a huge shift in that sector from doing its own R&D and the innovation in its sort of fortresses, and that shifted really to sourcing innovation from small, agile, innovative companies more and more through partnerships, through licensing, and more frequently through acquiring those companies at the right time. And of course, that gives an opportunity for investors. So the pharma industry as a whole, this sort of ecosystem is so significant that it actually stimulates the whole food chain and does what it can to keep that whole food chain working. And that's important. But of course, pharma also has global distribution and manufacturing that would be very hard for a small company to have. So many biotechs invest with pharma in mind. They build their relationships such that the deals and the opportunities are a when and not an if. And the further they go, the more value and the greater proportion they get. And those numbers are all very well established. And I think that's the classic way we think about a therapeutic biotech, but actually it's only half the story. In many speciality areas, particularly, let's say, in rare diseases, it's fully possible to go all the way now to gain marketing approval with relatively small trials, and put together small focused sales forces that can actually access large untapped markets. And there are many tens of successful companies that have done that and now command billion, multi-billion market caps. And further, of course, they provide also a new market access route for smaller biotechs. Central to that model is that value is captured in this sector by innovation, based on the two key pillars of patents and data. If you have the patents and you have the data, you have something very valuable. And that value is usually global. That's for therapeutic biotech, but of course, all the other sectors have their own unique business models.
Great, thanks for that. Can I pick up on that, just turn to Barbara in terms of what role has the wider industry played in COVID?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So, I mean, I think COVID has shone a huge spotlight on the innovation in our industry. And obviously, we're talking here about vaccines, therapeutic treatments, and diagnostics here. But I'd just like to focus in on vaccines for a moment. I mean, I think it's really highlighted that we actually have all these key pieces of the ecosystem here in the UK, and we've shown what's possible when all these parts of the ecosystem actually collaborate and work really to get well together, and when enough resource is actually put into it. So we've effectively done in 10 months what would normally take 10 years, which is an absolutely astounding achievement. So, you know, what are these different pieces of the ecosystem? Well, we've got the academic institutions, we've got biotechs, big pharma companies, regulators, and government. And I mean, if you look at the actual vaccines that are the front runners at the moment, we've got the Oxford University AstraZeneca one, with also there's VCTech, which is a little biotech company that no one talks about, which is in the mix as well. We've got the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. So obviously BioNTech is a German biotech company. And then there's Moderna and Novavax, who are both biotech companies based in the US. I mean, I think it's really interesting to note that the actual innovation here, these new vaccine types, came from the biotech or from the academic institutions and not from the big pharma companies. The big pharma companies have been incredibly useful in working to scale up and manufacture and distribute the vaccines, but the actual innovation has come from the biotechs or the academics. And big pharmas are actually pursuing some of the more traditional approaches to the vaccine as well. I think we need to remind ourselves that at the start of the year, we didn't actually know if these innovative approaches to vaccines, these new platforms, were actually going to work. And actually, we didn't know if anything was going to work because there are lots of viruses out there that actually still don't have any vaccines. So I think, you know, this is where the government, through the UK Vaccines Task Force, has played a very important role, because they basically behaved a bit like an investor, and they built a portfolio with a risk management approach to basically taking on these different kinds of vaccines in the hope that one of them was actually going to work. And I think that's been a really interesting and important thing, obviously. I think another important thing out of COVID is the legacy post-COVID, because I think it's enabled us to really build up our manufacturing capability for vaccines again in the sector, which is going to be a lasting legacy that's going to be important for us in the sector. So I think really it's shone this spotlight on the fact that we have got all these key elements in the UK, which is, you know, pretty unusual situation, and not many countries actually have that.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I turn to Jeremy now? I'm just picking up on one obvious point there, which is, you know, what drives the demand for, in this case, a drug. What are the drivers that the industry look for when thinking about new drugs or new products or new services?
I think, as in all industries, drivers really come from the demand and the international aspect of that demand, particularly in this sector. We spoke earlier about aging populations, which is something I'm now studying very intently. We've all got more time now to get sick. We've all got more time to worry about it, and therefore we've also got more time to develop our both anticipations and expectations of cures, of treatments. And for what applies here in the UK is now increasingly applying, it's spreading across the international sphere of nations to the growing affluent middle classes that appear in the emerging economies of the planet, in China, in India. So fundamentally, the demands are rising exponentially, a little bit like the COVID infection rate. And of course, with that demand comes more precise medicine, or requirement for more precise medicine. The whole idea of medicines being bespoke, designed for the patient, of being more efficient, of treating some diseases better, of treating some diseases where no no treatment was possible until recently, or may even still be being researched. So the way in which the technology is coming to meet the demand is actually the critical piece. And the observation that I've made, certainly over the last 20 or 30 years, is that as demand has increased, so the innovation gets more opportunity to be practiced and to be delivered. As has already been touched on, the extraordinary emergence of digital healthcare in the last 9 months or 10 months is going to change the way in which medicine is practiced in the future. I mean, crudely, consultations over video, which we're all now got used to in the last 10 months, will also lead into the way in which medicines are allocated, treatments are delivered, diagnosis is undertaken, monitoring of patients is going to change, and obviously things like rehabilitation. So there's a whole plethora of opportunity that's now opening up just as a result of a rather unpleasant experience of a nasty virus.
Yeah. And can I therefore ask Barbara, again, rather sort of, if you like, overview headline question, just how strong is the UK across this industry field?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think we're very fortunate in having two really key building blocks to start off with. One is a globally respected academic sector. I think we've got 4 of the top world leading universities here in the UK. And the other one is historically, we've had a lot of pharmaceutical companies that have had their R&D, they've had major R&D operations in the UK. So, I mean, what's happened in the last 20 years actually is well, lots of things happened, but 2 things particularly. One is that the academics have gradually become more positive about working with industry. So when I was doing my PhD, it was somewhat looked down upon that, you'd actually work with industry. And as for doing a spin out, I mean, nobody did that. And what's happened, obviously, is that now academics have a completely different attitude to this. And actually, quite a lot of them actually aspire to have their own spin-outs. And it's not quite as it is in the US yet, where it's almost like in the water in Stanford, where everyone expects to have a spin-out. But the attitude has definitely changed significantly in the last 20 years, which is very positive. On the other side, the pharmaceutical companies, unfortunately, have actually shut down an awful lot of their R&D operations in the UK. And what that's meant is that there have been a huge number of highly skilled and expert people that have come onto the market, and they've gone on to actually either create their own companies or to join other companies that have started or to advise startups. And so having these 2 aspects has really enabled the kind of middle ground of biotech sort of between the academic institutions and the big pharmas. It's really created a perfect sort of fertile ground for these biotechs to flourish in the UK. I think we also have a fantastic track record for innovation in the UK. So penicillin, monoclonal antibodies, we don't always have the reputation for exploiting it commercially as well as we could, but I think we are very significantly improving in that direction. I think that's been a significant change. And government supports the sector well as well. I mean, we have R&D tax credits, we have EIS for angel investors. Innovate UK has a very good grant funding scheme. It could always be more, but it's a very good grant funding scheme. So I think if we actually benchmark ourselves against other countries, I think, the US is clearly still way ahead of us. But when we compare ourselves to the rest of Europe, the UK is streets ahead of the rest of Europe. And just to pick up Jeremy's last point, I mean, I think the whole area of data-driven health is another area where the UK is absolutely poised and has a potential to have a real leadership role.
Okay, thanks very much. The mention of government makes me want to ask Ruth, with her BIA hat on, how supportive is it to the industry?
So I would be wearing 2 hats to say that the UK government is very supportive of the industry. First of all, with my BIA hat on, you just need to look at what has been done with COVID, how the government has stepped up to make money available, to put together the vaccines task force. BIA has stepped up with its manufacturing task force, nestled within the vaccines task force. I think, we were ahead. Without question, we were ahead. And there was a lovely Bloomberg article not that long ago that said when it comes to the biomedical response to COVID, the UK leads the world. And that was somebody else saying that. So I believe it to be true. The other area where I would say the government has been incredibly supportive in my previous role as Chief Executive of Innovate UK, I was actually really fortunate to see some of the machinations of government and how it supports the biotech industry. So actually there are many different ways. First of all, there is the technology infrastructure. So the catapult system. So we have a cell and gene therapy catapult that encourages, advises and supports building the whole cluster of cell therapy in the UK. We have the biomedical catapult, medicines discovery catapult, and out of that was spawned all the lighthouse labs that did the sequencing. And these are permanent pieces of infrastructure, partly funded by the government. Then, of course, there's all the grant systems that Barbara referred to. So the biomedical catalyst, which has put in, I think, something like 100 million over the past few years to help small biotechs get up and going, find new products, find new services to offer. Investment partnerships is another route, and smart grants. So Innovate UK and UKRI together have really put some offerings out there for companies in a competitive way. And then, of course, let's not forget the industrial strategy. There is an entire strategy written by government that has biotech at its heart, encouraging better clinical trial technology, better data infrastructure. They also have, of course, British Patient Capital and the British Business Bank. And I did a panel, not unlike this recently, where Judith Hartley, the new CEO of British Patient Capital, reaffirmed that life sciences and digital health are key areas for investment in the future. They invest in funds, and they're now beginning to invest in scaling really good companies. So I think there's huge opportunity and a lot of support from government. Very proud to say that, actually.
Excellent, thanks very much. If we just turn it round slightly, I'm going to ask Jeremy about, and given your VCT experience, Jeremy, the different ways that particularly private investors could participate in all of this.
Great question. And can I preface my response by saying that government clearly has a very important role to play, but so does the private money, the private investment sector, that needs to understand what this business is all about and needs to get comfortable with it. And that way we can rely on their continuing support to create the right environment for the companies that we're trying to build in the UK. And successful investment requires an understanding of the sector, and selection, choosing the right companies, is the key. And how to get that if you're starting from a zero base is probably to work through a collective investment vehicle, a collective investment fund of some sort, choosing the right skilled manager, choosing clearly a manager that has the experience that is relevant to the sector. And those structures are available both through the VCT, the venture capital trusts that are available for retail investors, who in fact can learn from what the investment trusts are investing in, and perhaps then make a choice as to whether they want to make direct investments. So finally, the direct investment, the investing in companies that are trading on a platform such as AIM, becomes part of the panoply of opportunity for committing funds to the sector. I think ultimately we've got to build confidence in the investing community that the sector is real, it's genuine, it's not an exercise of riding one's luck. It is actually an exercise of understanding what these companies offer, what the technologies are all about, and how those technologies are going to be deployed within something like the healthcare sector. And that message needs to be got across both by we in sessions such as this, but also by those who provide the advice, who provide the direction for these collective vehicles. Ultimately, the confidence has to be built between the investor community and those that want the money in order to commit these funds to the development of a COVID vaccine or anything else that's relevant to medicine today.
Thank you. Which leads us nicely on to the question of the nuts and bolts of physically investing. Is what metrics or what signs, Andy, should potential investors be looking for when trying to evaluate these businesses?
So, you know, like investing in any business, actually management and leadership is key. And I'll put that at the top because it is. But also, like any actually innovation segment, the central question that should be asked is, what problem are they trying to solve, and is it worth solving? That's very simple. And as an investor, you actually want management to answer that question. And it's not complicated. And management and leadership should be able to articulate the problem, the solution, the journey they're on, and be able to map that out, and how they add value and intend to make money, because actually as an investor, that's what you want to know. So the classic metrics of, for example, EBIT may not apply, but leadership really ought to be able to map out, in a simple way, measures of progress and milestones of success. So if it's a platform, when will it generate products from that platform? If it's products, when will it capture the dual underpinning value pillars of data and patents? If it's partnerships, who and when? If it's self-commercialization, where, when, and how? If it intends to go further, where will it get the capital from? And if it intends to stick, who will acquire it? And it's really that simple. And we overcomplicated it. We overcomplicate it time and time again. We wrap it up in difficult science, and actually the science isn't that difficult once you understand what the problem that people are trying to solve and how they're going to try and solve it.
Probably worth adding, just from a stock exchange and a public markets perspective, there is much clearer evidence now of more generalist investors getting involved in some of these opportunities, because it's fairly simple science which a layman can understand, and it then comes down to the points you make about quality of management, track record, belief in that company's ability to capture a particular part of the market, and so on and so forth.
And it's been characterized as being very high risk in many aspects. Actually, if the underpinning value is in data and patents, a platform, partnerships, actually it's not high risk. It's not high risk in relation to all sorts of other areas which go bust trying to buy market share. That doesn't happen so much in our space.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Right, so time for some questions now. Thanks very much, panel, for that. We could, of course, talk for hours, but sadly we have to pack this into a very short space of time. Can I just throw a general one out? And again, fairly quick responses for those that would like to volunteer them. I'm not saying with COVID out the way, because clearly we're a long way from that, but what do you think is going to be the next big industry thing? Who'd like to start?
I'll start. And it really builds on something that Andy said and Jeremy before him. And I think one of the big unsolved problems at the moment is dementia and diseases of the aging population. I work as a venture partner for the Dementia Discovery Fund, which is an investment fund put together to really try and research new treatments for dementia, and breaking dementia down into its component diseases like cancer. It's not just one disorder, and we've put together many companies to do that. And this is a fund supported by individuals, people like Bill Gates, charities, Alzheimer's Research UK, of which I'm a charity, put money in, British Patient Capital, and a large number of pharma companies. So I think if the problem is a big problem and it really needs solving, it takes all types of investors to make that work. That would be my first area of real interest.
Okay. Anybody else got anything to volunteer on that?
No, I was just thinking as Ruth was speaking there that she's entirely right. I mean, the brain, if you take the brain as a whole, is the most unexplored, undiscovered, complicated organ, which we really have an awful lot to learn about. And whether it's learning about what goes wrong with it or learning about how to make it better, all of those things are open areas for research and development. And we haven't really engaged our own brains in addressing those issues in the same way as we're now addressing a major experience of a pandemic. So I think we need to think through what the demands are that we're trying to address. Back to Andy's point, what are the questions we're trying to answer, and make sure that we focus on them in the same committed way as we've responded to a viral pandemic.
Yeah, okay. Changing tack slightly, we've had questions come in along the same lines, which this is not going to surprise anybody given the backdrop, but given the fast tracking of vaccines through regulators, does it now mean that traditionally longer cycles for approvals will shorten and therefore reduce development costs?
I think so much depends upon people's appetite for risk.
Yeah.
The purpose of development and the purpose of undertaking clinical programs of identifying and ascribing an understanding of how drugs work and how they're going to be deployed and how people will respond to them. All of that is built around protecting the population, the public, from things that have been less or not well thought through or not well developed. So the approach being taken through the pandemic is one that recognizes the emergency, but the reality is, I think, our population expects that it will be properly protected through the sort of approach that the pharmaceutical industry and the regulators have taken for years.
So does that, in saying that, does that imply that it's down to the industry and I suppose the end users to make the case for things to be effectively fast-tracked through regulators, and the regulators then comply based on the data they're provided with and so on?
I think there's two answers to that. One is accelerated access, certainly, for really impactful new medicines. But what I'm also seeing is coalitions where multiple treatments get tried at the same time. So instead of every organisation running a clinical trial testing their drug against placebo or against standard of care, there might be 4 or 5 drugs and 1 placebo group, which of course is what was done in the recovery trial so successfully in the NHS. Multiple different treatments were tested in one large cohort. I can see for some diseases, this has been done in cancer, definitely, but I'm now seeing it in rare diseases where there's not that larger population of patients, and you want to be giving as many of them a potential drug as you can. So frontotemporal dementia, I'm seeing that emerging, ALS, some very minor, so low incidence, but very significant disorders. I think we're seeing much better clinical trial design for the benefit of patients. So yes, I think we've accelerated that and are accelerating it more because of COVID.
I think there's a lot of learnings. There's a lot of learnings that and a lot of application of technology and approaches that won't go back to how it was before.
Yeah.
And I think people should be asking the question, why can't we do it faster, and how can we maintain the new momentum, which I think I think the other interesting thing in the space, going back to the question you had before and also linked with this one, is that the industry has traditionally been very sort of narrow. I think the diversity is now getting very significant. Diversity in companies where they've come from, business models. And of course, there are a whole new set of entrants looking at healthcare and life sciences, from the tech giants to all sorts of other players. And that in itself is going to bring new pressures, new approaches, new vigor, new dynamism, new pace. And I think pace is the word that we should all be hanging our hats on now.
I completely agree with that. And I think that I think everyone said everything really, but I think one point is that this compression of timescales that we've really managed to do, which is quite extraordinary. I think companies will now think about where could they apply this similarly to. I don't think they're going to apply it to everything because the amount of resources and the amount of risk is too great, but I think they probably will think about maybe 1 or 2 particular programs that they do want to apply this massive compression to. So I think we will see some changes.
There's also...
Barbara, sorry,
I was also just going to make one other point, which is many clinical trials have actually slowed outside of the vaccine area because it has been difficult to conduct those trials while people are at home. So I can see a big acceleration of remote testing, really looking after patients in a completely remote way, and new technology to build on what was done by imaging. Can we do that remotely? So some growth at the edge of engineering and biology to improve clinical trial processes.
Okay. And Barbara, can I ask you one that's come in? What does the panel think about mass asymptomatic testing, which could isolate the 1% of people who are infected and avoid locking down the 99% who are not?
Oh gosh, I mean that's a really difficult question. I mean,
Is that too fast a ball?
I'm not really qualified to answer that. I mean, I think obviously the more testing that we can do, the better. And yeah, I think test and trace is obviously key. I'm sure there are other people on the panel that are better qualified than me.
Anybody else got any views on that? Because if not, I've got the big question.
I'm not going to answer that question, Tim. But what I am going to say, and it was already happening, but the area of diagnosis and testing and longitudinal data was an area that historically has been very hard to invest in. It's really come of its own, and I think we will see huge value both from an innovation investment viewpoint, but also from in healthcare, from a new wave of testing and diagnosis, and particularly longitudinal testing. That means, with time on the individual.
Now we've had a question come in, which is quite a frequent topic of conversation, certainly within the financial community. And I know that Andy will have a lot to say about it, but I'm actually going to ask Jeremy first, which is, why does the US invest more in biotech than the UK per population, and how can the UK catch up?
The supply of capital into the US market is more broadly based than in the UK. I mean, one of the obvious aspects of supply of capital in the US is wealthy families and wealth generated by individuals can be deployed in a tax effective way into the industry. And that actually is something to be encouraged. I think we also recognize that the approach of the US to the advance of science in a commercial sense has been somewhat different to ours. I think we will catch up because we can encourage people to be more adventurous. We can encourage the entrepreneurs to be more driven. We can supply the entrepreneurs with the capital that they require in order to deliver on their ideas. But at the end of the day, we also have to get more confidence being built within the financial institutions that look after our pensions, that money is there to deploy into the industry that is healthcare, biotechnology in the UK in the same way as it's deployed in the US.
Andy?
Well, I'm going to agree with Jeremy that actually changes in the direct contribution pension schemes to encourage them to put a greater proportion into some of these areas would just be a huge fill up. Look, I'm an optimist. I always have been. I think that it's very hard. If you're really running fast with a new gene therapy company, not to be looking at how you access Nasdaq and how you access that pool of capital in the US. But equally, there are a set of companies here that have done extremely well, which could never have gone. Abcam would really have struggled to become what it has become, a $3 billion world leader, in the US system. So there are sort of horses for courses. What I would hope is, and what we're seeing now is much more transfer between them. UK companies floating on Nasdaq, AIM companies going across and dual listing, and I hope that trend will continue. I can see every reason why, with a set of relatively small things, the direct contribution pension scheme fund thing being one of them, new systems to encourage individuals to invest in the sector, and the renewed interest in healthcare, I can see AIM and London market picking up substantially over the next year or so, and it will be different. There will be some things suited to it, some things will be suited to Nasdaq. That's great. That diversity is what counts.
I think that's a very good, actually good summary analysis, and that is in broad terms what we are seeing in terms of, let's call them pipeline opportunities as well. However, the follow-on conversation has also popped up, which is what the panel think underlines the desire of so many quoted UK and EU companies to seek a Nasdaq listing. What can we do to make this a less pressing goal? Who'd like to take that?
Markets and being on public markets is about investors. So events like this are really important. You know, there are times when we've overcomplicated and tried to tell everyone it was hugely high risk what we were doing, which, as I said earlier, which I don't believe it was. I think if you look across the number of absolute failures of companies, individual products, yes, companies no. So I think we go through a re-education. I've never been of the belief that actually this sort of thing was entirely up to governments. I think it's actually up to us. I think it's up to us to tell people about the opportunity, and it's up to us to give investors the good opportunities and to show that things can grow here. But, you know, heck, there's a whole handful, more than a handful, there's a whole set of companies on the London markets on AIM that if you'd have put your £10,000 in them, you know, in January, you know, you'd be doing extremely well. I have some in my SIP. I wish more people would do that. You know, it's not that hard.
Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, any views on that? Not Andy's SIP, about Nasdaq.
I was going to ask him what he's put in recently.
Well, I did very well in Synergen, I will say. So,
in fairness, clearly the supply of capital in the US is different to the supply here, and that's one of the issues that we have to address. Let's try to encourage those who are looking after our pensions to recognise that the area in which we spend our time is one worthy of both investment from the standpoint of benefit to the country, but also the benefit to the pocketbook.
Thank you. Ruth, do you have a view on that?
Yes, I do. You know, investment, it's about money, but it's not all about money. And I think there is an opportunity for people to invest in things that they think are really important for the future. And what's coming into view for me is things like engineering biology. And one of the most exciting opportunities I had was to see an entirely new enzyme that had been constructed because it degrades plastic. And companies that are able to build technology to improve the environment, to help us with the climate crisis that we're moving into, these are investments for the future. And even if they're very long, patient investments, they're valuable in monetary terms and far beyond.
Okay. And Barbara, any final thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think if we're talking about interesting areas for the future, I mean, picking up on Ruth's theme there, I mean, I think the whole area of cell and gene therapy is obviously enormously exciting for the future. And I think obviously it's a bit like if you think about the gold rush, you know, there were people who actually did the gold rush, but there were also the people who provided all the picks and shovels for them. And those people made a lot of money as well. So I think, you know, if you think about the same from the cell and gene therapy perspective, the companies that are actually providing the supporting services, whether it's manufacturing supporting services or others, I think those are really interesting opportunities that might actually be lower risk in some ways. So having some kind of a balanced portfolio, if you're looking at an exciting new area like cell and gene therapy, and having some of the therapeutic companies, but actually also some of the picks and shovels supporting tools companies, I think there are some very exciting opportunities there in the future as well.
Okay, great. Right, well, the time has flown by. In the last couple of minutes, if indeed that wasn't your final thought, Barbara, would the panel just like to give their own one thought each in terms of thoughts for the future, thoughts on investment, any wisdom you'd like to impart given the audience?
Tim, shall I start?
Man.
Yeah.
Are you talking about your SIP again?
Am I muting it? Yeah, no, I'm not on mute. So investment is about timing. All investments about timing, getting in the right time. And the time now is for the digital revolution in life sciences. You know, whether that's AI in drug discovery, data in drug development, you know, healthcare, remote healthcare, digital therapeutics, as we've talked about. The digital revolution is going to completely change healthcare. It's an unstoppable movement. It's transforming healthcare at pace, and it's fast becoming an investable segment theme in itself. So I would talk to people about investing in that area, but I would also ask the question that everyone should be looking through the lens of the digitization of healthcare and life sciences at every single company and every single opportunity. How will it be changed?
Okay, thank you. Jeremy?
Sadly, I have to support Andy in his commentary, because digital is the way in which the world is going to go. I'm sitting here looking at a smart inhaler. I'm looking at a smart knee, all innovations that we've been working on over the last very little time, all of which are driving one key issue, and that is that there is going to be more data available that will help in both the diagnosis and the treatment of patients. And that, to me, is the big golden nugget of all of this. Data is going to be very important, the management of data and the use of data to make medicine work better in the context of our lives.
Thank you. Barbara, any final thoughts?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously being involved with helping to run the KQ Labs Accelerator program, which is focused on data-driven health, I completely agree with the previous speakers that data-driven health is absolutely going to be transformative. But however, I do go back to my previous point about cell and gene therapy and also the supporting technologies tools in that area as well.
Great. And finally, last but not least, Ruth.
So I agree on the data. I think that's the how. But there are many different whats, some of which are healthcare, some are environmental, and some are possibly things we haven't even thought of yet. So my last word would be to be attuned to the unexpected and be ready to adopt it. I think it's about flexibility. It is the most flexible and the quickest to learn that survive.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm sorry we're having to cut it short. You've been a great panel, and thanks very much for your time. It's an enormous subject, and we're only scratching the surface, I know, but perhaps we can revisit it sometime. So thank you very much indeed, panel. Thank you also, viewers and listeners. And a reminder that the report, which is a very good read, I might add, and I have read it, is available free on the BIA website. Thanks very much, and goodbye.